And we're back with Alyssa Olenick. Welcome on, Alyssa. This is your first time. I'm sure a lot of people listening know of you, followed your stuff on the variety of platforms. But for people who aren't familiar, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, I'll give you guys the short snippet. So I'm Alyssa Olenick. I have a PhD in exercise physiology, but my research training focus and emphasis is really in like metabolism, energy systems, like integration of mitochondria, skeletal muscle, all of those fun things. But then specifically in like sex differences, female physiology. My dissertation work was on the menstrual cycle and birth control, and then my postdoc work has been in menopause. But outside my academic niche of things, I've kind of become known as like one of the early originators of hybrid training in the industry before it came trendy. I've ran like over 17 ultra marathons. I just ran a 100 miler last year. I just did a high rocks this past weekend. I've competed in powerlifting. I love to strength train. So I'm like a jack of all trade, like a mid pack of all is what I like to say. I know that I am stronger than I am a good runner, but so I kind of have this niche of female physiology mixed with the hybrid concurrent training, blending together strength, conditioning, and running performance. Kind of is the encompassment of my brand and me as a person. And so I love sharing and bridging together the science of actual exercise physiology with training application, and then like kind of giving women actual good training advice that isn't just regurgitated garbage. That is a lot of the stuff that we see there in the online space. So there's the cliff notes of of who I am.
That was very streamlined. That was great. Before we dive into it, how is your experience with High Rocks? I know it's super trendy, biggest thing right now. How would you do another one? What's your overall kind of reflections of that experience?
So I'm already signed up for two more. So yes, I'm doing another one. I'm doing doubles in Atlanta in 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And then I'm doing doubles in New York in 8 weeks or whatever that is. So I will be doing more. I think after this weekend, I would like to do another solo and just see what I can improve with my time. I learned a lot. I had a really good experience. I had a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I may not be truly like an elite athlete, but at my heart and soul, I'm an athlete. So I love getting the opportunity to like race and compete and put myself out there and see what I can do and kind of get into that place. I mean, that I love that. So it was fun because I raced a ton of ultras last year, but that was like a race, but it was a different type of race. So I thought it was a lot of fun. We'll see if I kind of, drink the Kool-Aid of getting super into them, but I will definitely be doing the few months. And then we'll see. I think I'd like to go back and try to, PR, so to speak, my performance here from this weekend. But I am racing and training my first road marathon, this fall as well. So I have to pivot to that this summer. So kind of doing a little bit of everything this year.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Okay, so the four big topics I want to dive in today all are surrounding your areas of research and what you talk a lot about. And it's with women in a variety of different aspects. So we're going to dive into resistance training and what kind of the common beliefs and misconceptions are around women in training, eating for body comp and performance, training in and around the menstrual cycle, and then training in and around menopause.
Mhm.
Let's just go straight into topic number one:
Perfect.
resistance training with women. What commonly, there's so many different ways women have been taught and experienced with resistance training, but what are the really big things that are still going on that are just really false beliefs and misconceptions around women and lifting weights?
Yeah. Well, the first one would be, I think, applies to all things fitness, but sometimes gets really grouped with resistance training, is that like women need these specific, totally different, unique resistance training plans that are specific rep range or specific weight or a specific style of training or specific rest periods or all these things that are women specific. And you shouldn't train like a man. But then everyone who's telling you that is just rebranding resistance training and protein and just putting a pink label on it and making you feel like it's woman specific. And, we had a great study that just came out recently that is building on a study that came out previously, these meta reviews, they are meta analyses / reviews, and so to speak, that essentially shows that other than baseline, which is different from puberty and that surge of, hormonal differences we see with young boys and young girls, women have the same potential for muscle and strength growth as men when it comes relative to our size. So you're not that, brings me into point number two. You're not going to become too bulky or too masculine or too manly while there are going to be some women who are genetically predisposed to having more muscle mass or being maybe more muscular, I consider myself honestly one of those people. I've always been very muscular, probably largely due to genetics to some degree, but you have to try, right, to get muscular. It does not just happen by accident. And, tying into the body composition we'll talk about later is that like often when people talk about being toned, they often mean having muscle, but having low body fat percent with that muscle or less adipose tissue on top of that muscle. And so there's a lot of nuances there of people think that, oh, lifting will make me bulky. It makes me big. It makes me unattractive. It makes me masculine. It makes me manly. And I give sympathy with that with, I think more coaches should ask people, okay, what does bulky mean to you? Because I think we all think that if women think, oh, if I get bulky, I'm going to look like Mike Israetel or whatever that is, or look like that. But that's not what they're picturing in their head, right? And so we need to first identify that perception of it. But I encourage a lot of women typically to lean into the resistance training and to show themselves that you just don't blow up overnight, and that you do need good, smart, hard training to actually gain muscle. We see this, and we'll talk about this with the menopause conversation in a second, is like women are scrambling in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s to be like, crap, I never spent time building muscle. Now I'm aging. Now I'm losing muscle. Oh my gosh. Like, I wish I knew about this sooner. And so we're really doing women a disservice by painting this idea that light reps, Pilates only, yoga only, don't do heavy resistance training, type stuff is enough, or is enough on its own, I should say. It's not that those things are bad. So it's these ideas that we need these women specific programs. Lifting is going to make you bulky. And then number 3, building on that, is that like Pilates or yoga, or maybe your group fitness classes are enough. They're better than nothing. I'm never going to hate on any mode of group fitness. I think that does a disservice to so many people in this industry, and it doesn't give people the credit they need for the efficacy of group fitness. Women thrive a little bit more on that social support and fitness, and it's a great gateway for things. But often I'm usually recommending doing a little bit more specific strength training on top of the other forms of fitness that you love or group trainings that you do, in order to maximize some of that muscle growth and or strength that we want on top of like moving fast or light but high reps or isometrics or whatever it is that you're doing in your training. So I think those are the biggest things when it comes to resistance training that I think get a bad rap. Is this, to summarize, we need different programs. We need good programs. Most women just would benefit from a well-structured strength and conditioning program in general. 2, we have just as much potential to gain muscle mass and strength as men, but our baseline is lower, which means that we can gain muscle. We can adapt. We're not uniquely totally different than the men like we are painted out to be when it comes to responding. But you're not going to look like a man or elite male bodybuilder because your baseline is just lower, but your relative adaptation is similar. And 3, we need more than just like striving for Pilates arms and Pilates bodies when it comes to strength training. There's nothing wrong with wanting to change your body composition, but we do want to make sure we're training in a way that elicits or stimulates muscle hypertrophy and strength and growth and or bone density and tissues like that as well within our training. Because the biggest and most important thing for women is going to be muscle density, muscle health, and bone density and bone health. And those are things that a lot of women spend their whole life dieting and trying to be as small as possible and don't think about until one day they wake up and they go, crap, I just had multiple children. I didn't focus on any strength training, rebuilding, or crap, I'm in menopause, I'm aging, I'm getting older, and I didn't focus on those things. And so this is why we need to start where we're at now. It's not too late, but like those are really, really, really important when we're thinking about health. But then we'll spiral into body composition here. Like, for 99% of you, if you want to look quote unquote better or have that tone look or muscular look or that fit look or athletic look, whatever terminology you're using to describe it, it often comes from having a good baseline of muscle and then altering, how much of that and where that is and or, body fat that is stored on top of or in conjunction with that muscle tissue.
Yeah, I hear commonly with female patients or remote clients just these really bummer narratives that they've kind of instilled in their mind through years of hearing these things or being told these things. Recently, I had a remote client who just wanted to take out leg extensions from our program because she made a comment saying, I don't have man legs. And it's interesting because like the rest of the program is still resistance training. So even just like each person's specific view on just each exercise can be really different. And her associating leg extensions with blowing up her quads, which again, to your point, like the rapidity or like how quickly those things are going to occur, very rare. And it's very genetic dependent, and it's going to take time. And they associate just trying an activity or performing activities with substantial change in body comp,
Yeah.
and their worst case like scenario of how they think they'll look. And it is hard to try to navigate some of those narratives that have been in place for them for potentially years or decades.
And it's really sad and scary because for so many women, they are so much more concerned with not having those man legs than they're not at a place where they're ready to hear that that's not like that's why I think the industry just always dismissing that stuff isn't helpful, because you have to understand like for those people like what that means and have compassion for that. But two, I mean, I have friends who work in rehab who have clients who straight up will not even do rehab exercises that they need to regain strength from things that they're dealing with because they're so terrified that it will make them bigger and it will make them more manly or too muscular. And I think that there's this lack of trust with, you have to get sometimes people to do something for them to trust that it won't do the thing that they're doing, right? Like on the contrary, I have a lot of do it all our clients who we have to convince and beg to do less for them to see that they'll add up just as fine, if not more, and recover. But they're so like clung to doing that much that they have to do it to trust it. And that's hard to get them to do that. And this is that in reverse, like getting women to trust that doing more or pushing harder or pushing heavier or doing these things isn't the thing. It's not going to do the thing they think it's going to do. Or you can just stop. Like if you suddenly are such a genetic high responder and you just blow up, right? Like I did track in 7th grade and ran like 3 sprints and had calves, right? Because I was genetically always going to have my father's calves. And I just literally looked like my dad from the waist down for like literally within a week, right? And that was always going to be what I was going to look like as soon as I did any muscular development exercise. But if you look at my legs in high school and college or until I started powerlifting, yeah, they were a little bit more defined, but I wasn't beefy and muscular and dense until I specifically and intentionally chose to do that. But I could have just stayed, you know, 10 pounds later and not bulked up if I truly wanted that. And I don't want to give that message to women as saying like, stay small and muscular kind of thing, because muscle is really important. But the point is that like, I could say right now, yeah, I'm good with the size of my biceps. I don't need them to be any bigger. And I can train them, but not in high volume or maintain them or just coast with where they're at and never try to be like an elite, giant, normal bicep person. And I think people forget that like you can just stop or maintain or pull back or manage your nutrition in a way where you're not perpetually in a surplus. And at some point, you will gain muscle, but at some point it's going to kind of level off unless you're intentionally trying to push that ceiling of what your body can do. But it's hard, right? There's so many narratives. And I think in the strength and fitness space, we're like, oh, that's silly. No one still believes that. But when you talk to Gen Pop people, I mean, I have it all the time. I'll tell people what I do and they'll look me in the face. They're like, well, I don't want to do that because I'll get bulky. And I'm like, what do you think? I'm bulky? But they probably do think I'm bulky. You know what I mean? Like they probably perceive me as bulky and their eyes, and or that's a negative effect to them. So I think we need to understand like, for me, with the differences between men and women when it comes to training are so much more that psychosocial influence on how they believe, what they believe about their bodies and food and their body image and their selves more than anything. And this like, I need to be smaller narrative that's just so ingrained in them.
Yeah. If you had any recommendations for clinicians or coaches or trainers that are hearing these things from clients or patients, are there ways to navigate those interactions and those beliefs to shift them over time that are productive, and ways that maybe you would recommend against?
Yeah. So I'm going to just plug two of my friends here. Honestly, Dr. Casey Jo Orvis, she has this mindset certification that's amazing for teaching clients how to use like mindset, or coaches how to use mindset psychology that's like backed. She has a PhD in this stuff that helps you do kind of motivational interviewing and or getting them to answer and lead, rather than just like, it's not going to be helpful to just tell your client, no, that's stupid. Muscle makes you toned. You're wrong. That's not going to lead people to change. So I'm going to plug her as an amazing resource for coaches or clinicians who want to learn like how to integrate psychology a little bit more effectively. I've had my coaches go through it. I haven't gone through it, but like I always share it. And then my friend Karen Norden, she also has a similar like health behavior thing, and they have some resources for coaches, specifically in the space on behavior change psychology. And I think that some of that stuff's more helpful because you're trying to break through on something that somebody's coming in already with their answer of what they believe it's going to be. So I find that it's a lot. Don't just tell your clients, don't shut them down, don't make them feel stupid. Just don't tell them what you think they should do. Ask questions, lead with curiosity, have them answer that, maybe find a happy medium of like, well, what would you be willing to do, or are you okay with doing, or like, are you okay with like open to trusting me that this XYZ we can do this, and if you want to stop you can, kind of thing, and making sure that you're letting people leave with their own autonomy. And then I find for me personally, like with the social media space and clients and stuff, it's like showing up and being that example, or you continuously influencing people with the information they need to see multiple times, because sometimes that's what it takes to get that breakthrough for people to finally see it and believe it and trust it. So those are great resources for coaches, or they would be great people to honestly have on the podcast to talk about those things because they do have that training in those areas. But for us, with our clients, it's a lot of like leading with questions, letting them come with their solutions, let them explain how they feel, and then knowing when you need to like explain to someone how something actually works and happens. But sometimes you just kind of have to keep chipping away to get the person to then do the thing that then they trust it, right? And you have those breakthroughs, and it's really frustrating as coaches or clinicians that you just want people to do the thing that you know that they need to do, but they might not be ready for it, and they might have different steps of like, their behavior or thought change that they need to go through until they're willing to try or accept that. And or you can maybe to potentially come in with different avenues of like, for me, like maybe we aren't talking about strength for gaining muscle because that's scary, but we're talking about strength about being stronger and performing better for our sport or having improved bone density. And we can explain that, well, we don't have to do high volume because high volume is what really drives the gaining your size, and you can still do strength, but we can do higher quality, and heavy doesn't always mean bigger, and getting them in the gateway of like, and that's not false, right? And I don't want to say that we shouldn't strength train or do lifting not to gain muscle, but you can explain that there's ways to have like improve neuromuscular efficiency and strength that aren't just getting bigger.
Yeah, all of those things a lot of the kind of topic around motivational interviewing, in a sense of like the person has to be ready, willing, and able for change. You have to meet them where they're at and help be a guide and not try to enforce your beliefs or what's right or wrong. And that's very similar to managing a lot of the outdated beliefs around rehab and pain and injury.
Yeah.
And if they're not directly asking my perspective on something that I think is wildly inaccurate, I'm very rarely going to just completely like rock their world and call them out for what they've been told or what they think or what another clinician that they work with is saying to them. It's like slowly chipping away over time, building trust and rapport, showing them with their own body with rehab that they can do more than they thought, or these positions or these activities inherently aren't safe or aren't unsafe. So yeah, very similar concepts of like, you're not telling them what to do. You're kind of meeting them where they're at, figuring out what are some open points to dive further into these conversations, and then knowing that very rarely do people's minds change within one conversation or within one day. It takes quite a while.
Yeah. And I think that, this is a side thing, but it's related to this, is like the one thing that I think too many professionals, coaches, clinicians, whatever that is in the industry do, is they automatically want to jump down the throats of anyone who says something that's not evidence-based or 100% accurate or true. And I think something that I've even had to mature with is like, and sometimes I get like flack on content when I speak the language of what people are speaking, and they're like, people are like, are you being incorrect? And I'm like, no, I'm just speaking the language or giving people information that they want to know and understand, even if it's not as important or relevant or 100% evidence-based, but that's going to help them because they want to understand what they understand, right? And I think that too many people just shut it down, and they'll say things like, toned isn't a thing. You're not going to get bulky. That's like thinking you're going to come and ask our driver. And I'm like, that doesn't actually help anybody in the moment. But if you talk about, meeting people where they're at and talking their language, and same with the rehab and injury space, right? Like my dad literally won't lift legs. He thinks that he can just do all these things to strengthen his legs. And I just don't correct him anymore, even though he has knee pain. I'm like, okay, I just listen to him when he tells me what he's going to do, because he's not willing and ready and able to actually do the things that I'm going to do. So I just stopped intervening. And I think that's a sign of maturity, of knowing when to intervene, when someone's correct enough that you don't correct it, Um, I think that that's an important skill, a very important skill.
Yeah, I've also come to that conclusion in clinical practice of someone may be discussing 20 different things that I completely disagree with. And over the course of our care, are there a few things that maybe they change their mind on, but my goal isn't by the end of our interaction that they have to believe everything that I would love for them to believe. It's like this kind of slow churning, slow cooking process. And I think that just provide some relief as a clinician or as a coach that like you may have all this information, you can be a guide and provide these resources and help and education when appropriate, but you don't have to make someone into this like kind of cookie cutter similar human as you or belief
Yeah.
system. Yeah, I think that's been helpful as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. I know that's a deviation, so we can go on to the next topic.
Yeah, well, okay, so just maybe one bigger question with the resistance training aspect, male, female, training for the exact same goals. Anything training wise that you're changing, or is it largely the exact same questions for male and female of like their training background, their stresses, their time availability? If all those things are equal, is there anything you're changing from an actual like programming standpoint if it's the exact same goal or competition that they're preparing for?
Yeah. So the answer overall in general is no, but then I'll go into the nuance of what people want to hear and give the caveats within that. So, my base of importance for training for women at the baseline pyramid is macronutrients, stress, sleep, hydration. Like, are you eating enough? That is the number one most important thing for female trainees across the board. Then like, you have a high quality diet, you know what I mean? Sleep, stress management, all this stuff. Are you hydrated? Then are you actually following a good training program? A lot of women are not following a good training program. Then from there, we can do individualization or consider hormones and things like that. We could talk about that with the menstrual cycle stuff. There's these anecdotal or maybe loose stuff within the literature that's like doesn't really change much of anything, is saying that, well, women might be able to train at a higher percent of their 1 rep max because there's less neuromuscular efficiency. So like you might be able to do more reps at a higher percent, but your 1 rep max might not be as high as you would predict it with that, potentially. There's also maybe we might need less rest, but like the literature also shows that like if you do too much less rest, like then you're leaving gains on the table. It's not like we are suddenly our phosphocreatine system is rapidly recovered. And so I think some of these sex differences that people try to talk about and state as like this overall blanket thing really also leave out training status, right? An aerobically trained woman who's also strength trained in the gym is probably just going to also, and male, are going to just recover faster between sets than someone who's detrained and deconditioned. So most stuff is just meeting the person where they're at and or their fitness background, their recovery status, blah, blah, blah. The only thing that I would say that is slightly different is that allowing for, and this is falls in the bucket of auto regulation, and we can talk about this menstrual cycle stuff as well, but like allowing space for your client to feel comfortable talking about their menstrual cycle or menopausal symptoms or day-to-day fluctuations and what they're feeling, and or adjust for that within their training. So looking for patterns and or learning the skill to auto regulate that across the month, are the biggest things. So there is that whether the data shows that that's like such a big impactor on our performance or not, it doesn't mean that people perceptually aren't experiencing that. And I think we need to have that compassion for that. But from a programming perspective, I'm not changing anything, right? There might be some fluctuations I make in response to that person. But really there's not like some special rep range for women or special rest time. If you have a client that is able to crush recovery and high volume between sets, amazing. But like you can also see those differences in your male clients based off training status and or what they're training for and things like that. So that's just because there might be some of these physiological differences, but when you blanket it, when you put together training effects, adaptations, stress, sleep, all this stuff, it becomes like physiology soup. So you're really just better off just training the person in front of you. And then like the biggest thing is just not ignoring people's experience with their hormones or perceptions with that in training. Because whether that's having like a true muscular impact doesn't change the fact that for some people it might be impacting their performance perceptually or in general.
You've already alluded to some of the body comp and performance discussion for eating, but can you just touch on a lot of the common beliefs that women have if they want to change body composition, whether it's increasing the muscle mass or losing some body fat, or they want to get better at their sport? What are things that commonly are being misrepresented or just are completely false and we should think about differently for women?
Yeah. So for one, the biggest thing right now getting debunked on social media, I've just been watching this with my popcorn. I could just hop into the fire, but I've been letting people who are a little bit more credible in the protein space, like Stu Phillips, lead the way here. He's had some great stuff on this recently, and his recent PhD grad Lauren, who they're just protein metabolism researchers, so that's more their field. Is like, there's this common narrative that women have like these specifically shorter, immediately after feeding windows after training, and you have to get in your post workout protein or you'll shrivel away. And or that there's these stark, massive differences across the menstrual cycle, which like I can touch on a little bit more within my niche and expertise. But there's this idea that we have to like either rapidly chase our nutrition across the month or rapidly change it with any hormonal fluctuation, or that we have like these really narrow windows of things that we need to worry about. When in reality, most things are similar between men and women with some caveats that I will give here. So one, low energy availability is really important. And that is something that I think is the most important conversation we have when it comes to women that are training a lot. And something that gets kind of meshed together with this advice we're getting for women in the online space is people are giving advice for women who are highly fit, highly trained, highly active, or athletes to Gen Pop people. And then Gen Pop people are confusing and frustrated, right? So I might say, hey, you're training 90 minutes to 2 hours a day, 8 to 10 hours plus a week. You're super active. You're doing a ton of endurance training or a lot of strength training. You really care about these specific nitty gritty details. I might say, yeah, get a protein rich meal or shake relatively close to your eating window, but your overall intake still matters more. But if you're like doing 2 days or double days, you're trying to replenish your recovery, it's probably a good idea to make sure you're getting in some carbs and protein immediately. Whereas your Gen Pop person who is working out once a day, eats a normal diet, just needs to get enough protein, they're probably not going to die if they are like 90 minutes, you know what I mean, until they eat their meal or their shake or whatever, as long as they're hitting their overall daily targets. So there is this nuance of general active people versus more active women. And more active women are where I say it gets a little bit more specific, which we say for men too. But this low energy availability is something that is the biggest thing that I think makes us different from men, is that we are more sensitive to energy deficits. And that can even be within day energy deficits. So again, Gen Pop regular women probably just need to be eating enough calories for their goals. You can be in a slight deficit, maybe slight surplus. Honestly, I don't think women really need to like bulk as much as they need to just eat enough calories, unless they're a really hard gainer, which really means that they're probably just under eating and they just need to eat more. But keeping protein moderate to high, probably 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, is probably a fine recommendation. We see the narrative around of like 100 grams a day. I think that's a good baseline for most people. I think more can potentially be better. But for most people, that's a good baseline in this general pop camp over here. You probably don't need to worry about too many things, just making sure that like your carbs versus fats match your activity levels. The higher active you are, the more carbs you're going to need, the more calories you're probably going to need. Get enough in during a day. Don't go a really long time during the day without eating. The biggest issue with women is that they wake up, they don't eat, they live off coffee, a whiff of air, a piece of lettuce for lunch, and then they like are just like they're not eating, they're not feeding themselves, or they're haphazardly or under eating, whether that's because they have kids and they're busy, or they are trying to do, some form of fasting or whatever that looks like, and they just like kind of are in this energy deficit state throughout the day. For those that are highly active, that over time, whether that's an energy deficit across the week, individual days, or even within day deficits, can become problematic hormonally over time if they're not eating enough calories across the board. They're doing this chronically. So like, I didn't eat breakfast until 9 today because I was busy doing things. I didn't die. Like, I'm not going to die in this one day. But when I'm doing a really high training day and I'm really super active and I had a hard workout the day before, it's probably not as ideal that I did that, right? So it's more of a chronic stressor. But this essentially means that we are more sensitive to these deficits, which means that our body will downregulate the hormones that lead to ovulation or having regular healthy menstrual cycles and or can mess these things up. And that is not good. We don't want to down regulate our metabolic and hormonal responses in our body, or loss of cycle, loss of ovulation, mess up length of cycles. That is what happens when we get like hormone imbalances from eating and or training. And so you have, again, this dichotomy. Regular people aren't really as at much risk for this. You're probably eating enough. Most people are overeating, fluctuating with maybe periods of undereating. You're kind of regular eating, whatever that looks like. Versus the more active you get, the more I'm like, hey, let's make sure we're eating regularly across the day. 3-round meals. Yes, if you're doing double sessions or long sessions, it's probably good within the next hour or so to get in a carb and protein rich meal. Have carbs and protein in you before doing that session. If you miss a day, you're off here or there. You're not going to die. It's more about these chronic deficits, whether they're daily, weekly, or even large intraday deficits, can be stressful on the body. Mixed with one of the things that gets left out of this conversation often is that really low carbohydrate deficits in women can also elicit low energy availability response. So one of the biggest concerns and issues that we still struggle with women is this fear of eating carbs. Carbs make you fat. Carbs are scary. Carbs are bad. Blah, blah, blah. The regular Gen Pop woman over here is probably eating a relatively okay amount of carbs if they're just eating a normal diet, or if they're overly restricting it. Yeah, you might want to bump that up if you're doing like 4 days of F45 or Orange Theory or HIIT class or lifting or whatever in a week. But as you get more intermediate to advanced or moderate to high activity levels, like as your activity level increases, especially cardiovascular training, lifting does have increased carb demands, but cardiovascular endurance training really, really drives this up. You simply need more carbohydrate. And I find that so many active women are so scared to eat more carbohydrate because they are so afraid that it's going to make them gain weight or make them fat, or it's unnecessary, or it's bad for you. And they're not only hurting their performance, but they're often also hurting their potentially hormonal health and or recovery and or adaptations and or like all of the things that we want. They're making their training more stressful, right? So I'm trying to give this balanced view here because some of this nitty gritty stuff might not apply to some people that you're working with or listening to. So like if my mom was like, hey, if I train fasted, is it the end of the world? I'm like, you're fine, but just eat breakfast after. But if my client who's training for a marathon and lifting 3 days a week is like, can I train fasted? I'm probably going to say it's probably better for you to eat something before you do that, right? There's that nuanced conversation between these things of saying women can't train fasted, you will die in the spot, women have to have protein immediately after, and or the narratives of like carbs make you fat, be afraid of carbs are bad for you. And that becomes this like confusion soup for females. So what should you do? Alyssa, you just told me 17 million things. So what should you do? And so you want to eat enough protein to support your activity levels, performance, and recovery. 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight or 0.8 grams per pound is usually a pretty good target. You can go a little bit higher if you're more active or highly active and or you really want to push the edges of muscle growth and recovery, and or maybe you're in a really high volume of training season. I also like the minimum of like no less than 1 gram per pound of lean body mass per day at like your lower end for most people, right? So I really like eat protein is a good thing. That is something that's being pushed towards women right now. I think it's amazing. That's awesome. It can be hard to do. Don't be afraid to supplement, use dairy products, whatever that looks like, XYZ. The next thing is the more active you are, the more carbs you need. And something that I think gets left out of the conversation a lot, this is a little bit myopic, so deal with me, is that so many people think of carbs and fats as equal equivalent that you can trade off for the rest of your calories. And this is true for regular people thinking of body composition or dieting or whatever that looks like, even recreationally active people. But as you become more intensive in your training, higher volume, higher intensity, more frequency, adding in a lot of endurance training, or you're really pushing your strength work, I opt or say keep your fats at like that 20 to 30%, whatever that is based off your preference or your needs, but you should be driving up that caloric intake increase that you need with carbohydrates. And I think where most people mess up is that they don't realize that if they're constantly depleting your carbohydrate stores with training, but you're not replenishing them, you're either going to feel like that bonky feel, that lightheaded, that hangry. But sometimes if you eat the things that are high in fat, but you think are a carb food, you're eating enough calories, or you're overeating calories, but you're not actually matching that need of glycogen restorage or carb restorage in your body that you need. So I think what a lot of people do is they start like kind of overeating calories out of their hedonic response of hunger to drive up food intake, but they're not actually matching the need of what they need carbohydrate wise. So that's where I have the shift of, well, you should be favoring more of those additional calories after that certain point coming from carbohydrates. And I think for many people, that seems scary from a body composition perspective, but I think it will actually become like more optimal, because not only will you replenish your glycogen stores and have enough carbs to support your performance and training and recover, you also will keep your calories like more in check and have the recovery and performance things that you need. This is a spectrum, right? This is a spectrum. When I'm in my off season and not peaking and not super training, I do favor carbs enough to support my training, but I'll let my fat intake go a little bit higher percentage of my overall intake of what I'm doing. And I'm not so careful about it because I'm like, okay, I'm probably getting in enough carbs. I prefer a little bit more fats. That's totally fine. Versus when my training goes up and my volume goes up, I'm like, okay, let's dial this in a little bit more. So you just have to make sure you're adjusting it to where you're at. But I think so many people think that, so many women think that by increasing that carbohydrate amount, that's the thing that's automatically going to be making them fat. And I don't want this to say like eat low fat, you need fats for hormones and for overall health. I'm not telling you to go super low. I'm saying like kind of lock it in 20 to 30%, wherever that is for you, and fill the rest of that increased needs with carbohydrates to support that performance and training, and adjust that advice down based off who you are. And if you're, even if you're regularly recreationally active, your clients you're dealing with are increasing their training. High rocks is really trendy right now. Running is really trendy. So your regular gen pop person, even if they don't need 400 or 500 extra calories a day to support their performance and training, if they're typically restricting carbs because they're afraid to eat or living off vegetables and a whiff of air and a nice coffee, and they start training for that 5K or 10K, they're going to increase their caloric needs, or that high rock. So they start adding in more strength training. They're going to need more carbs and or calories potentially to support that increased training. So, you know, the increased carbs, but also I think that so many women are afraid to eat enough calories to support the training demands that they have, because they're afraid it is going to make them fat, but they don't realize that they're eating what they need to support what they're expending. And or we do have people who genuinely have body composition goals, or they have true fat loss goals, and they don't know how to balance that with training for performance versus aesthetics and things like that. And that is where I recommend to women is, one, if you've been in a diet or trying to diet or yo-yo dieting or restricting on and off your entire life, I don't care what size you are to yourself, relative or true or objective, go an entire year of just focusing on getting stronger and eating enough. You don't have to eat too much. You don't have to gain a bunch of weight, but just eating enough and not restricting and feeling what it looks like, feeling what it's like to just be fed for performance and what you're doing. And people might think, well, do I have to go a whole year without losing weight? I'm like, if you truly have weight to lose, you probably will in the process of this, just improving your diet quality and not focusing on restricting, which you're probably going to hyperswing from, eating enough. Most likely you're probably going to either lose a little bit of weight or recomp in the process of that. And or you can decide at some point in time of like, okay, I'm going to be in a small deficit while doing this potentially. But for so many regular women, they don't know what it's like to just eat and support themselves and eat enough and give that up. And it's just keeping them in the cycle of never, ever, ever making progress. And if you have this maintenance baseline, a deficit or a cut is going to be so much easier. Figuring out how to feed yourself and maintain that will be so much easier over time, or fueling for performance and adjusting that across the board will be so much easier over time. But you need to know what it feels like to eat enough, not be in a deficit, not be crazy, eat more even across the week. Stop doing this restrict all week, overeat on the weekends, starve all day, overeat at night. Like try to eat evenly and more spread across your days and weeks. More like increase the quality of your foods, have enough protein, eat enough carbs for performance, and just stop trying to restrict it or diet it for an extended period of time so you actually know what that feels like. And then from there, if you truly want to recomp your body, you want to go in a deficit, you want to go in a cut, do it in a season. Don't do it when you're training for a powerlifting meet. Don't do it when you're training for a half marathon. Don't do it when you're training for high rocks. Take a period of time where you are not pushing your performance and just eat in a deficit, or eat your calories at your maintenance level, keep your protein high, carbs for performance, and slightly pull that back just a tad while you're in a more maintenance phase of training. I love base building for this for strength. You can recomp while lifting if you're in a lifting specific season, but don't take these massive hyper swings. Either go all in, get out, and get it done. Do it where you're trying to recomp in an extended period of maintenance time, or don't do it at all when you actually have some sort of specific performance training goal. Those are kind of my buckets of things for people, but you have to stop fearing carbs. You have to stop fearing eating enough, and you have to stop being in the deficit, restrict, overeat, undereat cycle in order to feel like what it feels like to be actually fed, which will feel scary because it's going to feel like you're eating more, but most likely you're probably eating the same amount spread out, or you're eating less. And then if you really truly struggle with hunger, satiety, dieting, behavior things around food, working with a good registered dietitian or qualified nutrition coach or company or whatever that looks like, that can help you navigate those outside of my blanket advice, because nutrition is just as much psychology and behavior as it is easy to eat macros and type in your food or whatever that is. So this advice to you, again, just like the lifting won't make you bulky thing, might feel scary, and you might need someone to help you and support you with maybe overeating, or the binge restrict cycle is your issue, or maybe undereating is your issue. Like, you need someone to help you figure out what advice applies to you and how to integrate that into you, and or take the chance on not being scared, on fueling yourself appropriately to support your training. I'm not anti-body composition goals, but you need to stop trying to diet from no baseline and or trying to fuel your performance on air because you are afraid it's going to make you fat. Sorry, I just totally ranted there, but
That was great. No, I'm glad you kind of segmented those two out of kind of general population. There's maybe some level of exercise, but normal individual that's not having high training goals or is just getting into exercise or not really moving at all. Those priorities, the nitty gritty really doesn't have to be there, and maybe there's more flexibility. But then once things scale up or ramp up from a training volume intensity, the kind of nitty gritty matters more. And these things, like you said really early on for women, if they don't realize they're in a little bit of a hypocaloric state, like the probability or the risk of low energy availability and reds and the all of these impacts just matter and hit a way more or way quicker. So yeah, that was awesome. Let's go to number 3. So exercising and the menstrual cycle.
yes.
You talked about it a little bit with the first topic of training, but what is commonly misrepresented with training in and around the menstrual cycle, and how should women think more about this?
Yeah, the common cycle sync narrative is that you need to be changing your exercise every single week to something different, and you can only do high intensity and heavy lifting certain times, and the rest should be gentle and easy and low intensity. And just one, we don't have any data or evidence. This is all based off of hypothesis or hormonal hypothesis from people who don't have even any training in exercise or strength or any sort of like background like that. So it's not rooted in any sort of sound structured exercise. It's just like this feels good hormonal hypothesis of dancing around your hormones. But we're not that fragile. We're not that weak and incapable. So you don't need to only do strength training and HIIT during ovulation and then do like Pilates and yoga during the luteal phase and menstruation, or avoid exercise during the luteal phase or menstruation, or you won't immediately die of cortisol death in the luteal phase, or whatever else is being spread out there. But you may have some perceptions in your changes of performance around the cycle. Typically, we see this reported in the onset of menstruation. So like the first few days of the menstrual cycle in the early follicular phase, the onset of menstruation, or the very late luteal phase, the few days before the onset of your period. And so, we see potentially some performance decreases there, or what we see is potentially alterations in your perception of pain or discomfort. So like in that late luteal to late luteal phase, women might say, my strength performance is terrible in the gym. And it might not be because their muscles aren't able to produce power output. It might be because their perception of pain and the alterations of that is increasing RPE at the same weight, or they just are more fatigued. Sleep might be poor, things like that. And that's not to discredit those things. It's just saying that like you might not be having like a muscular effect type thing. but that doesn't mean your perception is wrong. Or some people have extreme PMS, PMDD, endometriosis, PCOS. They have these different conditions, and there's nothing wrong with adjusting your training, whether that's volume, intensity, rest days, order of your week, all of that stuff to yourself or your client. But it's not necessary to overhaul the entire training program. You can follow the same program across the month, but the things you might be adjusting are just if someone feels good, great. If you do feel good in your follicular phase, late follicular phase ovulation, and you want to send it in the gym, go for it. Because if you're feeling good, auto regulation captures that, right? Your RP8 weight might be higher than it was the week before. Go, great, amazing. Like I do that anyway in training. But if you do feel crummy in your luteal phase or whatever that looks like, maybe we need to adjust volume or intensity or heart rate zones. Like there might be some impacts on thermoregulation and increased heart rate, or your zones might then, your pace of the same zone might be lower. And that stuff's totally fine and valid, but that's just adjusting that. Or I'm a big proponent of like, let's use nutrition to support ourselves a little bit better. And the data on this is kind of mixed and it's controversial in the online space. And I don't think you need to be changing your diet entirely. But if you are feeling poorer in the luteal phase, we may have 2 to 12% increase in resting metabolic rate, or we might have none at all. The data is kind of like, it might be there, but it's probably not there. But like eating a little bit more or carbohydrates around your training will probably help that. Or if you're under eating, what I think is more of the issue is if you're under eating all the time, you're going to notice it more when you're symptomatic, so to speak, because we do have like, not a ton, but there's a few studies that show like when people ingest carbohydrate, performance differences go away from across the phase, or metabolism differences if you're fed before things go away across the cycle. So my biggest takeaways are being fed first before adjusting those things. Maybe you're increasing your pre-workout nutrition, intra-workout nutrition if you're doing long endurance stuff, and or just maybe you're bumping up your calories just a little bit. 2 to 12% is not that much, but maybe you just need to be eating a little bit more, and like that's fine. Eat an extra snack, support your training, or making sure you have a good sleep schedule to support that kind of thing. You might need some extra support in that luteal phase. People report because of thermoregulation or elevated progesterone, they feel as if sleep is impacted. So that's totally okay to adjust to trying to improve sleep quality. There's some early studies suggesting things like tart cherry juice and cherry juice concentrate can help with recovery, inflammation, and sleep quality. Not a bad things to consider supplementing. I usually say like in the luteal phase, but like you could just do that the entire month. So a lot of these recommendations then become like, or you can just do it the entire month, so to speak. And so that's really my general recommendation is just work with manipulating volume, intensity, and or like if you're working with a client one-on-one, maybe you're just modifying the skill of what they're doing because maybe they have extreme cramps and something like a full range of motion squat is uncomfortable for them to do while on their cycle, but maybe they can do a box squat or a leg press. Like that stuff isn't cycle syncing. That's just being a good coach and smart programming and working with the person in front of you, and or not totally dismissing women's experiences with their training. But there was a study, and this was done in like VO2 max and cardiovascular performance, where they essentially tracked women across 2 menstrual cycles and the patterns of their performance, and it was different cycle to cycle. So I think people forget that the menstrual cycle is the only thing predictable about the menstrual cycle is that it's like unpredictable, is like a quote that they have in some of the literature. And your performance this month to next month might be different, and your performance to someone else's performance will probably be different. So it's not like we just all fit in this one size fits all 28-day, all of our cycles look the same, and or how it's impacting us is exactly the same. But if you do want to support yourself across this, track your cycle for 3 to 6 months, see if there's regular trends, things you can predict for. If you know the day before your cycle starts, you don't want to do your HIIT session or your hard intensity session, you'd rather just do it earlier in the week or skip it once a month if that works better for you, or it's okay to take a rest day. I think the biggest message that the reason cycle syncing is so trendy is because women feel, one, left out of training, two, they perceive these effects. So they want something that works with them. It sounds nice on paper. Or three, women follow terrible exercise programs that overabuse intensity, underabuse rest. They don't eat enough to support it, or they eat haphazardly. And so when you pull back on your intensity, whether that's 2 weeks a month, 1 week a month, or oscillated across time, you're either increasing energy availability if you were someone who was heavily restricting food and overdoing intensity and exercise and were relatively lean, or you just feel better because you're not just using exercise as an abuse overuse tool, but you're actually following a good program, because good programs adjust volume, intensity, and or phase you over time so you can recover and or work with you as a person. Just like we know that not everyone needs a deload every 4 weeks. Some people might. Some people might be able to 6 to 8 weeks. Like you are all of the things that we kind of give advice for with the cycle training stuff really comes down to the stuff that you should be doing with people anyway, or teaching women that it's okay to say, you know what, I need a break. I need a rest day. I can't push as hard. Intensity doesn't feel as good today. I don't need intensity 8 days a week, 3 times a day in order to be skinny and thin and abusing volume and intensity in order to drive that. That's where most of those issues come from. And most women then find that their cycles are either impacted or worse or all these things because they're just overdoing stuff and or not eating in conjunction with it. Or sleeping and managing stress and all of those things alongside that. We don't need to worry about cortisol. That's a normal response to exercise. That's an adaptive response to exercise. If you eat enough carbs or you're not chronically underfed or you have enough carbohydrate in your bloodstream while you're doing long endurance activity, guess what? Cortisol response is blunted or lower or less or doesn't oscillate up, and or it's a normal adaptive response to training. It's not making you fat. The luteal phase is not killing you. If you feel like there's a lot of rumors that say you should avoid high intensity training in the luteal phase because we're more inflamed and it spikes cortisol. But like our reports are potentially cortisol might be higher in the follicular phase mixed with HIIT across the month actually decreases inflammation across the month. So like a lot of stuff you're seeing out there just isn't backed by science or it's the opposite. But the catch-all response, and again, if you want more nuance and details of this, like I have other stuff places, you guys, if you want like more of the science of this, I'm trying to give an overview, is follow a consistent training program that's adaptable and repeatable. You'll have less of a stress response the more you do that. Balance intensity and volume. Do some lower intensity stuff, some higher intensity stuff. Space out higher, harder effort work with just your regular moderate to lower effort work, and or rest, recover, sleep and stress management, and eat enough. And then if you feel crummy, guess what? You have permission to pull back.
Boom. That was great. All right, let's round it out with the fourth topic, menopause.
Yes.
Around this period, women start to hear a lot of things about exercise, nutrition in and around menopause. Let's round out this conversation with better ways to think about women's health and training priorities and eating during this period.
Yeah. So when it comes to menopause stuff, I feel so bad for menopausal women because they are just the target market of every scam out there because you're in a really difficult period of time. How you feel is valid or how your clients feel is valid. I think the biggest thing I'll say to clinicians and practitioners or coaches listening to this is like, don't just minimize your menopausal or perimenopausal client's experience by saying, well, that's not true. Nothing happens because they're going to lose it on you. I get yelled at in my comment sections no matter how nuanced and delicate I try to be. So just listen to them. They're frustrated. It is hard. They might feel foreign in their bodies and or whatever it is. So again, with menopause, we have two groups of women. We have the women who neglected strength training or proper exercise or kind of never really dialed in eating their entire life. And now they're aging and menopausing at the same time. And oh shit, all that's catching up to me. I should have been doing that stuff sooner and I didn't. And so now I need to do it. There's that group of people. Then you have I've been a lifelong athlete. I'm highly athletic. I've performed a lot, whatever that looks like. But now I feel like a foreigner in my body. Things are changing. They're not the same. My fat is redistributing. I don't know what to do. My performance feels wonky, things like that. So you have to figure out who you're talking to, right? And then even in the performance bucket, a lot of times you have women in the older generation now, hopefully this is getting better with our generation, who were highly active with endurance sports, but they didn't do strength or power training in conjunction with that. And now that's catching up to them. So, yes, there is muscle loss and power loss associated with menopause and perimenopause, but it is confounded by the fact that it's also associated and overlapped with aging. It's not just 100% unique to menopause. It's just that you have this double whammy overlap of, oh, I've been losing muscle for the last 10 to 15, 20 years already. Oh, now my hormones are changing. It's impacting sleep and recovery and my energy levels. Oh, I'm less active across the board because of that. Oh, maybe my diet's catching up to me. I have life stressors. I have kids in high school or college, aging parents, care responsibilities. There's a lot going on. So this isn't to say that this stuff doesn't impact you and doesn't impact body composition or muscle or performance or activity levels. But in general, there isn't this like magic impact where menopause is suddenly melting all your muscle. You can still maintain or gain muscle through the menopausal period. If not, if you haven't been lifting already, it is the best time to start doing that. If you haven't been doing endurance or cardiovascular training, it is the best time to start. You're not too late. You should absolutely start as soon as you hear this, or people that you work with tell this to your clients. You can still gain muscle, you can still gain strength, you can still improve body composition. It's not all doom and gloom, but it might be harder. And it might be harder because you do have shifts that in adipose tissue, fat tissue, from the lower body to the central body. I think that's the number one complaint of women with menopause, is that they have more belly fat. And that is real. You stop storing what fat like you do when you're premenopausal, which is more hips and glutes, lower body. You start to store it more like a man. So you have more in your subcutaneous and visceral adipose tissue, like in your abdomen, stomach region. And that sucks. And it's just part of it. And the only way to do that is to lose fat. Um, and then, when it comes to training as well within this, there's a lot of misinformation. I think strength training gets a pro. Like, strength training with menopause is all of a sudden like, yeah, that's the thing you should do after telling women to avoid it for the first 20, 30 years of their life, which is the opposite of what you want to do to be healthy and strong going into menopause. But there's a lot of scary information around cardiovascular training during this time period as well, of, the cortisol boogeyman, gonna make you fat, only do hit and sprint training, don't do zone 2 cardio, moderate intensity cardio is making you fat, blah, 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 blah. And the reality is, you need to meet yourself where you're at with cardiovascular training. Telling menopausal women who aren't super trained to just go do a bunch of hit or sit intervals is going to blow them up, right? The nuance there is that intensity is important as we age, or for menopausal women to maintain that power output of our muscle tissue as we're doing that, mixed with women may need a little bit more intensity as part of their training. Peri and postmenopausal women, to get the same effects in their training, they might find that they need a little bit more intensity to drive that, but they also might find that they have lower recovery. They might have more tendon and joint issues. So we want to make sure that we're balancing intensity, volume, and recovery. You might need an extra rest day. You might need to space out more high intense sessions with lower intensity sessions or rest days across the week. And also through the perimenopause time period, you have a lot of fluctuations in your hormones and your energy levels and how you feel. And that's why I love the skill of autoregulation, because if we train women to autoregulate premenopause, when they get to menopause, they're going to learn how to work with their bodies when the cycle is unpredictable and haphazard and all over the place. So it's not that menopausal women need suddenly different programs. They need to either start resistance training, power, plyometric, jumping based training if they weren't already, and they need good conditioning and cardiovascular training that meets them where they're at and includes some intensity as they can tolerate, that can build over time. And they might need some extra rest and recovery alongside that. So my trifecta of menopausal training is strength work, power, plyometrics, jumping, that kind of stuff. That's really important for bone and bone loss. That is something that is exacerbated and rapidly we see associated with declines in estrogen through that transition. And so we want to make sure that we have the strength work and the power and plyometric work to maintain or gain or prevent loss in bone mass during that phase of time. That is super important. Mixed with metabolic health is one of the biggest risk factors and is rapidly impacted by the menopause transition. And we're scaring women out of doing cardiovascular training associated with that. And so the other things outside that around lifestyle is there's some early human, some mouse model, just, caveat of that data to show that there's less spontaneous physical activity. Potentially you might be moving less and not realizing that you're moving less. And that's really hard because people say, I didn't change anything. And there's data that says, well, you might be inherently moving less and not realizing it. And there also may be changes to your natural eating patterns that you don't notice, so that you're either eating more or your body is wanting more protein potentially and you're not giving it. So then it's driving up hunger. There's this protein leverage theory. So I think protein is an important thing. Again, that's a theory, but I think, in general, for muscle recovery, aging in general, people need more protein as they age. I know that seems counterintuitive. You're like, oh yes, I'm older, I can finally stop eating so much protein. No, you need to keep it high. Mixed with the other hidden hero of menopause is going to be fiber. Fiber keeps you full. Fiber keeps you healthy. Fiber will help you regulate. I don't want to say like fiber is going to help you regulate your weight, but it's going to make your food meals more filling. It's going to help you with, your GI health. It's going to help you with satiety and dietary quality. So protein and fiber are like the champions, I would say, here for everyone. But I think that gets left out of the conversation often for a lot of people. If you're eating a low protein, low fiber diet, you're going to feel hungry and terrible all the time and or overeat. Like those things are going to help you maintain satiety, feel fuller, maintain a regular caloric intake, whatever that looks like for you. And then the conversation around body composition is hard here because there is that shift to central adiposity. Women are saying that like no matter how much I diet, no matter how much I restrict, I'm not losing weight. And I think, the research is trying to figure out, is there truly an energy deficit decrease here? What's going on? If there is, it's small, like maybe 50, 70, 100 calories a day. But the problem with really small energy deficits, and this is supposed to scare people, but like small gaps in that over time, they don't lead to big weight gains overnight, but over time, chronically, year after year, they can. And that weight creep is what happens a lot in menopause or aging in general, is there's just tiny gains. But women do report that they have this rapid increase around menopause transition. Somewhere, I think it's like 5 to 10 kilograms or 10 to 20-ish pounds are what most women report on average. That's in the SWAN studies. I'm probably off in there, but let's say like 10 pounds on average is what we're seeing, 5 to 10 pounds. So there is a normal response to that, and it sucks, but it's not the thing that is going to drive that's going to support that change of that or fat loss or all those things is still going to be an energy deficit, supporting your sleep, increasing activity, and or trying to gain or maintain your muscle mass, because muscle mass is the biggest driver of your energy expenditure across the day. And if you've been slowly losing muscle mass since you were 30 because you weren't resistance training, it's going to feel more exacerbated by all of this going on. So you just need to, what I like to say is you just need to tighten the bounds of what you can do. So the things that you maybe got away with pre-menopause, maybe you just have to tighten that up. Maybe you got away with not resistance training. Okay, now you need to resistance train. And I think it also is compounded a lot by a lot of women have children in their late 20s into their 30s. And we see similar risk factors and concerns with you having baby after baby after baby. Nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? But you're losing muscle because you didn't strength train throughout pregnancy. You didn't strength train after. You didn't strength train between, or you didn't recomp, gain back. So you keep losing and losing and losing. And then, you stop having children, or you never regain that back. And then you're in menopause 5-10 years later. And so there that is a concern too as well. So I just don't want it to seem like, menopause is all doom and gloom. I think a lot of the narratives and messages that we talked about earlier don't set up women for success in that time period. But then when they get there, they feel so unheard and so unseen and so like there's no solutions for them. And again, it's good training programs, power strength, plyometrics, good cardiovascular training, and then improving nutrition quality. You have to eat the Mediterranean diet has like the most kind of objectively accepted evidence for support for menopausal women as like the best diet. You really want to think about eating for health because you have so many changes in metabolic risk factors, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease. All of these things are exacerbated by these shifts over time. So even if your body doesn't look like it did when it was 20 or 30, which it might not, you know what I mean? It's probably not going to for most of us. We're going to age to some degree. Aging is the culprit for a lot of this. A lot of people want to blame menopause entirely, but it's completely overlapped also with lifestyle change and aging. It's a 3-way Venn diagram that elicits all these factors. But you should be more concerned about your metabolic health long-term during this phase, because that is what is more at risk. And that means building and maintaining muscle. That means being relatively active and including cardiovascular training. And it means improving dietary quality. And a lot of things that menopausal women don't want to hear is cut the alcohol or reduce it significantly. That will also improve your sleep. Sleep will be potentially impacted. That's just a thing. Doing what you can to improve the quality of your sleep where you can. Cooling environments, winding down, dark spaces. Maybe your kids or dogs need to exit the room if they're waking you up a lot, kind of thing. I love my dog, but she sleeps in the bed next to me, so she doesn't wake me up. But I would even have a hard time with that one. Mixed with, making lifestyle choices that make it better. Alcohol is such a big one. I don't think people realize how much that's impacting things for them. And there's such a wine culture in that era. So those are the things that I think really need to be taken away is well-structured training that includes power performance and some intensity. Don't fear low or moderate intensity. It's not bad for you. We want strong bones, strong muscles, and aerobic fitness. And then improving dietary quality, fiber intake, healthy fats, healthy carbs, reduce processed foods, and cut the alcohol entirely or a lot if you can. And that's kind of my menopause, like, surface level recap.
Yeah, again, you crushed it. And with all these 4 topics, there's so many subtopics within them and so many other conversations within those. But I think you covered really all of the big hitters that I was hoping for in addressing the really big priorities. We'll link your Instagram, your podcast, your YouTube, your website for people that want to dive further into all of these or some of them and have way more information. I think this is a good place to stop.
Yeah.
Any other final thoughts before we wrap it up, Alyssa?
No, I think that for those of you who are potentially listening to this and you don't like hearing that word, not that entirely different in what we need from a training program, is to lean in to just actually following a program that is really rooted in strength and conditioning and not fitness marketing towards women. I think that's where most of that misinformation comes from, is not good fitness professionals giving bad information, is that the industry has pried on years telling you intensity, volume, cardio, be skinny, undereat, thin, and lean into potentially, like, you don't have to become a crazy performance athlete, but think about your training from a performance perspective and fueling yourself for that and health. And I find that for so many people that leads to the body composition and or fitness goals and results they've always actually wanted. When they kind of stop taking a dieting fitness industry media narrative to the gym and start thinking of that way. It's not sexy. And then the last thing I'll say, they'll link everything below, but I have a YouTube video on performance versus aesthetics. I have one on menopause. I have one on cycle syncing. I have so much content on gaining muscle and strength and hybrid training. So, like, if you want to dive in more of all the subtopics, I probably have something that you can go learn a little bit more from there. So don't shoot the messenger. I'm on your side. If you want to learn more, it's there.
Perfect. Thanks again, Alyssa. We'll call
Yeah.
it there.